This is Agri-Series, and today we will be focusing on the topic of China-Africa cooperation in agriculture. Especially, we will be talking about how to foster sustainable and inclusive investment in agriculture. Today, we are very happy to be joined by our panelists here. First, we have Celso from TechnoServe Project Manager. We have Fidel here, also Project Manager from GAPI. Paulo Mole, our Country Manager in Mozambique from Agra. And finally, we're very happy to have Pedro here from Ministry of Agriculture, MASA, from Mozambique. So let's start maybe with a question to MASA here from Pedro. We all know that there's a lot of potential between China-Africa cooperation in Mozambique, especially. For example, the rice production, for example, small-scale machinery, agricultural input, etc. So in your view, what do you think is the highest potential in terms of value chain or in terms of different crops? What is the highest potential of China-Mozambique cooperation in agriculture?
Thank you very much. Before anything, I'd like to say thank you for all participants in this conversation, and thank you very much for the China cooperation between Mozambique and China. And as you know, the cooperation between Mozambique and China started a long time ago, and the ongoing process. So we need to enhance this kind of cooperation. And as you said, we have a big potential for agriculture here in Mozambique. We have arable land enough to produce for our country and also to export. We have a human resource which can follow many issues linked with sustainable development. And on the other hand, also we have rich soils, we have water resources, and we have also the shortage of food, for food security for our people. And we think that is big opportunity to strengthen the cooperation of China, looking for the new technology, looking for the mechanization, machinery, looking for the different kind of intervention like a greenhouse. So we already seen the experience from China in terms of the inputs like a greenhouse, and also we'd like to have the farming system enhanced here. And also we can see the ways how to produce seed, quality seed, looking for the value channel of different crops which have a big potential in our country. So looking for the crops, I think that beans is big opportunity, rice is big opportunity, cashew nut is big opportunity, maize is big opportunity, horticulture, and into the crops. So is it possible also to see which crops can give answer for our needs, looking for the win-win view. But I think that we have a possibility to produce all kind of tropical crops, which is big opportunity for us and also for the market Chinese. And finally, I'd like to say that we're able to follow with this cooperation, looking for the sustainable approach, and also looking for the win-win cooperation according of the sustainable ways, and also looking for the following for the rulers in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro. We heard a lot of expectation from you. You mentioned, for example, mechanization, new technology. In terms of value chain, you also mentioned rice, maize, beans, cashew nut, especially targeting a market in China. So there are so much expectation and potential. We would like to hear now from Paulo from Agra. We know that Agra is also supportive of China-Africa cooperation. So my question is, why do you think Agra is supporting this, and what are we doing specifically to support the cooperation between China and Mozambique?
Thank you, Shane, and I would like also to thank for this opportunity. As a country manager for Agra and as a representative of a capacity building institution in the country, of course we are looking for all the opportunities where we can facilitate a meaningful and sustainable relationship between any country, in this case in particular China, which I think, as the national director here mentioned, the potential on technology transfer and also on maybe best practices in agriculture. So, as you know, Agra, one of its line of work is supporting the government on designing sound policies. Well prioritized interventions and investments. And I think within that area is where we see a highest potential in learning from the China-Africa cooperation. So in that particular case, we are looking for facilitating, if you like, brokering the relationship between China and Mozambique in particular, in the areas of technology transfer. And probably if I have to go deeper into specifics, we are looking for technologies that are suitable to farmers, which are the end users of our interventions. I know that there has been a big discussion in this country, even when you talk about mechanization, for instance, tractorization, what type of technologies that are suitable to farmers. We see in the China-Africa or China-Mozambique cooperation as a way of bringing that type of technology that's adequate for the smallholders that we have. And of course, the second area within that is what you can do in terms of priority crops. We support the priority crops such as rice, maize, soya, and cassava. We are seeking for those technologies that China has in those areas to bring in. In particular, when we talk about rice, how can this country increase productivity in such a way that can get the prices of rice down in a context where we have a lot of rice coming from abroad. So increasing capacity, the country's capacity to produce rice is one of the areas where we think that the China-Mozambique cooperation is critical. The second area is, of course, we have started this in concrete. As you know, since last December, we have been working with some Chinese companies in the field, in particular Lian, in the attempt of scaling up the seed simao that today currently used in Mozambique, taking it further to more farmers in the north, in particular in Zambezia. We also see the China-Africa and China-Mozambique cooperation as one of the way of bringing these companies in teaching farmers on how they can use this type of seed, high-yielding seed, to support the farmers that they are supported by our interventions in those corridors. Last not the least, of course, as I said, we are supporting what the government sets to be a priority, and we are looking forward in this relationship to see those companies in China that they can come and help us to support the government in implementing their priorities.
Thank you. Thank you again, Paulo. I heard 3 keywords from your response. First is you stressed on suitable technology. which I think is a very big strength of Chinese technology, because China is also based on smallholder farmer structure. So a lot of technologies are suitable. Second, I heard you talking about Agra is supporting government, whatever government priority is. So we also hope China can also support the government capacity building. And the third word I hear is how we can leverage Chinese technology and technology transfer to increase the productivity, especially on, for example, priority crops in rice, maize, soya beans, for example. So speaking of technology transfer, I would also now like to ask Celso from TechnoServe. We know that you are supporting a project with Agricultural Technology Demonstration Center, which is also known as CETAL in Portuguese. Can you briefly introduce your work with CETAL? And I know that you're also working with a Chinese company in this project in Zambezia, in Mopea. So what is your experience so far working with this Chinese company?
Thank you, Chiching. As you explained, my name is Celso Tamela. I work for TechnoServe. TechnoServe is an NGO that works in development, and we are currently implementing a project which aims to support the Agricultural Technology Demonstration Center of Mozambique, whose name is CETAL. Which stands for Centro de Investigação e Transferência de Tecnologias Agrárias do Umbeluzi. And the project is supporting CETAL in two components. The first one is institutional development, and the second one is strengthening the technical capacity for technology transfer. In this scope, CETAL is focusing on two main value chains. The first one is rice, and the second one is horticulture. In scope of technology transfer, what CETAL does is to implement a technology transfer model which focuses on four main components. The first one is identifying technologies that are suitable for the smallholder farmers, testing them, demonstrating them, implementing pilots to ensure that they can be scaled up, and at the end, the final phase is scale up. And for that phase, CETAL partners with key institutions from the private sector and also NGOs and, of course, government to make sure that those technologies reach as many farmers as possible. Talking specifically about the rice value chain, CETAL has been happy to interact with Chinese companies whom are operating in the country. There's two of them that CETAL is working with again through the project. The first one is Wambao. They're operating in the south of the country in Gaza province, and we have also Lianhe. It's operating in Mopea, and that effort's a joint effort between Agra, GAPI, and the government is participating through CETAL with support from TechnoServe. In terms of technology transfer, it is important to know that the most important thing here is to look at the model that these Chinese companies are using to transfer technology to Mozambique. The Chinese approach was it's always more business related, meaning that Chinese companies come here to operate in the country. And Wambao and Lianhe have been in the country for quite some years. And what we have found is that they have been successful in including smallholder farmers in their production models, in using outgrowth schemes and etc. And so meaning that the technology that they are implementing has been somehow transferred to the farmers. But there is one gap there. From my perspective, it's that most of that knowledge is not being documented properly, meaning that at the end of the day, we need to follow the guidelines of the government, which is to improve the performance of our private sector, and also ensure that our smallholder farmers have all the tools that they need to increase production and productivity. Meaning that at the end of the day, the idea is not to have Chinese companies coming to replace our private sector, but for them to work together towards a common goal, which is improving productivity, and so that we can reduce our our dependence on imports, as Dr. Paulo mentioned. So what CITAO is doing now is supporting those two companies through the projects, one with Agra and the other one being supported also by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is the sponsor of this project, is to make sure that all the knowledge that it's been that has resulted from the hard work that the Chinese companies have been performing, talking specifically about the technology package for rice production to obtain the very high yields that those companies are obtaining, to be properly documented so that it can be transferred to other private sector entities from the country. And after that is done, I think we will be able to increase the number of rice farms in a sustainable way, because at the end of the day, sustainability is key.
Thank you again, Celso. To make the investments more sustainable, you mentioned two key approaches. One is we need to document the technology package. Second word you mentioned is scaling up. And to scale up, I think it's very important for the Chinese investors, companies to work with local community, especially local government, local private sector. So now the final question I would like to direct to the local private sector. Fidel, you are from GAPI, you represent the local private sector, and in your view, how do you think the Mozambican private sector can work with Chinese investors and make the investments more sustainable, more inclusive?
Thank you, Shinkim, for this opportunity. We as Agape, we are a development financial institution, and our aim is to develop Mozambique private sector. As Shinkim mentioned, our private sector can have these opportunities to improve our private sector with the Chinese investor. So first of all, we need to be ready for this kind of investment. We needed to have our policy oriented to the win-win situation, because as I realized, the Chinese investor, it's not a NGO approach or non-government approach or aid. It's more in the doing business. So if we are talking about doing business, we needed to have a private sector who is ready to do the business. And the key issue to do the business is to have at least organized private sector with the accountability, with a platform which Mozambican private sector can access information about the Chinese company and about the Chinese investor. And another important topic is we need to consider cultural aspects, because we are Mozambique, we have our cultural aspect, and the Chinese also, they have their cultural aspect. So it's important to consider this aspect. And also our private sector has been operating mainly in agriculture through SME, small and the medium enterprise. So it's also important for the Chinese investor to segment which kind of companies they want to invest, because the approach that may be used for micro and small medium company is different the approach that Chinese investor may use for big company. And if we are looking for Mozambique sector, it's dominated by small and the medium enterprise. I'm excluding the familiar sector. That's also important, because we are around 80% of smallholder farmer, they are dominated this sector. So it's also important that Chinese investor, if to have more impact, they needed to to focus on development or to focus on design investments that may be impact smallholder farmers. So in this case, that we hope that we may go forward in this relationship between China and Mozambique. And also, our investors, they need to be organized in the way that the Chinese company easily can access information about the Mozambican companies regarding to the business environmental, long-term investment, and also we need to protect Chinese investor. If a Chinese investor will not feel protected, he will not invest in Mozambique. So it's very important to protect the Chinese investor. And also to understand that it's a win-win situation. The Chinese investor will not, as I heard before, will not change the way we are doing if we are not ready to change.
Thank you. Let me just quickly conclude, and I may have one more question for everyone, so just one sentence, because we hear a lot from Fidel about the enabling environment, if I may summarize. It's about the access of information, so the Chinese investors know what are the opportunities here. It's about accountability and the culture, for example. So my final question especially to Pedro here, the government role and the development partners' role in creating a more conducive, enabling environment for Chinese investors to come in. So especially from the government side, for example, how do we plan to protect the benefits of the Chinese investors? How can we organize more the information?
In Mozambique, we have the investment rulers. So into the investment rulers, we have some legislation also, and that legislation is included the support and also the protection for investors. I think that all the rulers or all regulation must be enhanced. So it's important to identify which kind of constraints which create problem to investors. So we need to identify which kind of constraints. I think that this is opportunity also to Agra, because Agra also is linked with the policy revision, policy enhancement. So to identify which in the practice which kind of approach must be enhanced. But in general, our legislation, our rulers also protect the investor. So when some investor come to Mozambique, so he has some rulers to follow, and there are obligation from the government and also obligation from the investor.
Again, as I said, we as Agra, we're here seeking for opportunities to improve the relationship so that the end goal of the China-Mozambique or China-Africa cooperation takes place in a way is desirable for the end user, the farmers. I think there are critical issues that here were mentioned, which are important to the China-Africa in general cooperation. If it is the way as we see it in Mozambique, it's complex and it will bring about new issues, right? On the policy side, like enabling environment, as the director says, it's difficult to distinguish specific policies for China, because tomorrow is going to be Brazil, the other day is going to be America, and all that, right? These are type of policies like improving the environment for business is an international issue. But what's critical here in this case, as he mentioned, is the China-Mozambique relationship in the agriculture sector has a developmental goal, but the instruments that we are using are more like profit-oriented, right? We are talking about the use of private companies, private Chinese companies that are coming here for profit motive, but at the end, they have to work with beneficiaries that are not probably ready. We are talking about farmers. And to do that, right, they need a strong relationship, as Fidel was saying, with local private sector, which is still weak. In particular, the type of private sector that we're talking about, small and medium enterprises. In most of the cases, they are not existing, right? They don't exist. They need to be developed. They need to be, for those that exist, they need to be trained, and trained on issues like he mentioned, access to information, right? Be clear that the Chinese companies are coming here for profit, but they are using a development goal, which is desirable, and that's unquestionable. So we need to create that critical mass of small and medium enterprise with which these companies should work on a commercial basis, right? So that's an opportunity of building capacity, which I think we should be discussing as a next step. How do we improve that relationship, taking into account that the critical actors for this, for meeting the requirements of the development using this relationship is a business base. He mentioned about accountability, right? Accountability, without it, no private incentives will be there for engagement. So we need to think about that. So it's important. It's something that we need to be building. We need to be following. We need to be identifying those critical factors so to smooth the relationship with that. And then I think for Agra, it's an opportunity to identify those, document it properly, and then effectively bring it about so we can help for the policymakers make the decisions that are needed, and overall to improve the business, the environment for the agriculture business in the country.
Okay, thank you very much, our panelists. I think we all touched on very, very important issues such as enabling environment, policies, capacity building, and SMEs, how Chinese investors can work with local private sector. So let's conclude the panel here, and thank you again for being here. Thank you.